question before the House. The House of Assembly do adopt the report of the Standing Finance Committee on the estimate of expenditure for the financial year 2020-2021 in the sum of $1,697,312,800 and do agree that the said sum do form a charge against the consolidated funds and other funds of the state of St. Lucia.
Honorable members, and indeed the general public, that our traditional friends, our friends that we've newly established relations with have come forward to support us, and they continue to do that. Mr. Speaker, I do also want to take the opportunity to clarify our government's position on Venezuela, because it has come up a number of times, even to the extent that the member for Labrie would want to suggest that perhaps we have not received the kind of support that we need to receive to combat COVID, because we have taken a particular position on Venezuela, which is quite ludicrous, Mr. Speaker. We would not have been able to manage this crisis if we had not received the support that we have received from friendly governments, many of whom share our values. Mr. Speaker, I do want to, as I'm on my feet, make it very clear again what our position is on Venezuela. Mr. Speaker, we are a country that respects the rule of law. We respect and adhere to democratic principles. The question of participation in elections and free and fair elections, the question of ensuring that democratic processes are respected, we made it very clear that we did not recognize the elections in Venezuela as being free and fair, because opposition members were jailed and precluded from participating in elections. I do not know what is so difficult for the members on the opposite side to understand that we respect the right of opposition to participate in elections. Is it okay for members on the opposite side that opposition leaders in Venezuela were jailed and not allowed to participate in elections? That is something they cannot accept and understand. Mr. Speaker, our position has always been, with regard to Venezuela, that there must be responsible governance, there must be respect for democracy and the rule of law. On the question of resolving the crisis, it must be resolved by the Venezuelan people without any outside interference or military intervention. We've made that clear. And CARICOM's position itself, which we have helped formulate, has been that there needs to be free and fair elections or a referendum in Venezuela. Don't the members on the opposite side agree to and believe in these principles?
Honorable.
And Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Honorable.
I'm wrapping up, Mr. Speaker, if I may. Speaker, Should we abandon these principles just because we are faced with a crisis? Do you abandon your principles just because you're faced with COVID or crisis? I don't understand it. Mr. Speaker, to reiterate, we have been able to manage the crisis because of the support we have received from governments who share our principles, who continue to respect and appreciate the friendship that we have had with them, long-standing friendships. Mr. Speaker, just to make the point again, you do not abandon your principles, fundamental democratic principles that you stand on, just because you are faced with a crisis, COVID or no COVID. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before Member Kasrisafi speaks, I will be circulating a draft. I mentioned it earlier, although the Standing Orders Committee, we've not met because I've been awaiting this draft out of the Caymans to show members what the resolution and the proposed amendment in Cayman that allowed for the Cayman Parliament legislature to meet remotely. So I will be circulating it to members. It may not be today, but in the event that members believe that there is a need for such an amendment into our standing orders, you would have at least have the hard copy. Very well. Honorable Member, Kasrisafi is.
Mr. Speaker, permit me to remove my mask. Mr. Speaker, I stand here this evening to lend my support to the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year 2020-2021. Mr. Speaker, I would like, first of all, to thank God for this opportunity, given what exists in the world today and the uncertainty of the environment in which we are presently, not just in the fear of death, but the fear of or the concern of isolation or being quarantined. And I think that I can speak for every parliamentarian here that we are thankful that all of us can be present here in the Parliament for a debate and a discussion. It does not miss me to acknowledge that it's the mercies of God that have kept us, combined with the efforts of what has been done by all our people in St. Lucia, more so the Ministry of Health and our frontline workers. Mr. Speaker, a group that is often missed in all of this is those at the command center at the NTN and GIS. And we applaud them. And even those who are here covering, so that those who are at home can see what is happening. Mr. Speaker, all of the people of the constituency of Castries Southeast, I want to acknowledge the staff of the Ministry of Economic Development, of Housing, the NHC, the Transport Department, the DVRP, NAO, all of these entities, Mr. Speaker, have been working very hard, even in remote locations at times, to help deal with this crisis that is before us. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's something that I must say. It is very important as we go through this debate today. COVID, as we know it, is novel. It's new. It is something unprecedented. No one has experienced, at least in our lifetime, anything remotely close to what COVID-19 is. And I try on every occasion that I speak, Mr. Speaker, to remind us of why things are the way that it is today. And Mr. Speaker, last month, it wasn't that way. But today, every one of us here can begin to look at today as a new chapter, the first day of the rest of our lives with COVID or without COVID. And it is important for us to do so, Mr. Speaker, because based on the discussions I have heard here today in this honorable house, you would think, Mr. Speaker, that the credit worthiness of a country is the answer to COVID. That if the economy had been managed better, whether by this government or previous governments, that would have solved the problems that we have. You would think that money is the solution to the problem that we are faced with when I listen to the members opposite. But here's the reality, Mr. Speaker. First world countries with the best healthcare systems in the world, with the entire treasury and printery of money at their disposal, have been brought to their knees and their economies are flat. As we speak today, so to come and try to make it that this government did not manage or another government did not manage, our management contributes. Our management contributes to where we are, whether how well we will manage moving on. But Mr. Speaker, we must never lose sight of the fact that places like Europe, the UK, to be more precise, the mighty USA, the #1 economy in the world, China, Germany, you name it, Mr. Speaker. Italy, one of the best healthcare systems in the world. Mr. Speaker, coronavirus is still baffling to the best of science. The best scientists in the world still cannot tell you the outcome. But Mr. Speaker, in the midst of all of this, while some people chose very early and prematurely, I must say, to say that we were the worst prepared country in the world to deal with coronavirus, the evidence today proves the contrary, that St. Lucia have been among the top countries in the handling of coronavirus in the world. It is only, we like to put down our own people. We like to make it look like we are nothing. All of us. We are wearing badges today. Buy Lucia. There's a reason for this. There is a reason for this, Mr. Speaker. Because this government, and as I go through my presentation, you would understand our concept of buy local or buy Lucian did not start with coronavirus. It started while we were in opposition, planning to be in governance in this country. And so, Mr. Speaker, we must not be misguided by the persons who want to paint a picture and want to make it look like this government has something against public servants. And I've heard them, the refrain on the other side, because that is what the opposition does every time. But the record, and they've spoken about record and they've spoken about numbers, and I will pass on this quickly and say, I have a number of collective agreements. I have every single copy of the collective agreements over the years. They are all here, Mr. Speaker. And no government have given more to public servants in this country than the government sitting on this side of the house. No government. And I challenge any member opposite to prove otherwise. And if you want to see, collective agreement, April 1, 2013 to March 31st, 2016. St. Lucia Correctional Facility and Welfare Association. Here is what it was. 0, 0, 0. Collective agreement. Government of St. Lucia. St. Lucia Nurses Association. Same period. 0, 0, 0. Collective agreement. Government of St. Lucia Civil Service Association. 0, 0, 0. You want me to call more? Government of St. Lucia Medical and Dental Association. 0, 0, 0. You know, Mr. Speaker, during that, now these were the men. Collective agreement. Collective agreement. 2007, April 1st, 2007 to March 31st, 2010. Collective agreement. April 1, 2007 to March 31st, 2008, 3%. April 1st, 2008 to 31st March 2009, 4%. And April 1st, 2009 to March 31st, 2010, 7.5%. And I can go down the line, Mr. Speaker. So for members opposite, we will deal with that next round of the debate. For members opposite to come and give the impression that this government somehow have something against public servants, I want to remind them. This was the government.
Mr. Speaker, on the point of order, the member is misleading the House. The highest percentage of increase given to public servants in this country was given by the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party. Highest. Highest, and that is what created the base. That was created the base for the increase in civil service. The highest amount, the highest, it was 60% increase. That was the highest ever given to public service in this country. The point of order is, you said that the highest increases given to members of the public service was by your government. I'm saying to you that is not true, because the highest percentage was given by the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party.
0, 0, 0.
Just take notes, sir.
Mr. Speaker,
And how much we give? We, all of them.
just remember, the same man they walk out on in the House every time. You see, conveniently, 30 years ago applies. But when it's not convenient, 30 years does not apply. But, Mr. Speaker, I have been showing the track record of the men seated on the opposite side of the House today. Don't tell me about what other people did. Tell me about what you did when you had the opportunity. I am telling you about what we have done when we had our opportunity to be the ones representing the workers. Further, Mr. Speaker, and not how many minutes of my time they take, you know. Mr. Speaker, this is the same government where the member for Castries East sat in government when they removed pension from public officers and moved them over to the NIC, cut out the benefits that these workers were getting as pension workers when they retired at 55. The St. Lucia Labour Party government. Today, Mr. Speaker, this is the same government who brought to Parliament estimates of revenue and expenditure and made a separate document for the list of payment for public officers with a proposal to cut public servant salaries by 5% across the board, permanently. But you know, Mr. Speaker, you know what the member for Castries East said when that happened? At the last discussion, when we asked him what was the crisis, you know what his response was from his chair? The deficit. They created a deficit and they called it a crisis. And so they went back to cut public servant salaries by 5%. But I want to tell St. Lucians, watch them. Listen to their advisors and pay attention to what is happening. I followed a program on NTN recently, and I heard one of the advisors said that VAT should be increased because their plan was to increase VAT to 17.5%. So when this government came in and cut VAT by 12.5%, so now 2.5%, 2.5, it went down to 12.5. And if you look at the aggregate, 17.5. But I'm not even playing with these numbers. I'm just going to the straight 2.5%. Mr. Speaker, you know what I heard? One of the proposals was put a 5% levy on salaries. And you can go and replay on NTN, and you will hear. You see, Mr. Speaker, I'm telling the workers in St. Lucia, be careful. Be careful about what the Labour Party says. And the member for Dennery South gave a very good definition for hypocrites. But you see, Mr. Speaker, in biblical history, when the term hypocrite was used, it was not necessarily used in a bad sense initially, because a hypocrite represented an actor, somebody who came and played the role or the part of somebody else. That is exactly what you have on the other side. Actors. They never govern. They're acting because they say one thing that represents something completely different from what they do. And since they like scripture, because I heard them quoting today, let me tell them, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Proverbs. Yes. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So Mr. Speaker, just go and Google it. You'll find it. Just put it. You see, Mr. Speaker, I move on because there are so many things to deal with. You know, Mr. Speaker, today, one of the hardest parts of the COVID situation that we are faced with presently in this country is that, Mr. Speaker, while we have had no deaths in this country, we know that sympathy and support during the period of the passing away of a loved one means a lot to people in this country and in our culture. And while we've not suffered any death in St. Lucia, St. Lucians have died overseas, and we extend our sympathies to their families. But even here, we are not able to sympathize in person with people as we ought to. And that is very touching. When a friend or a loved one dies and they have to say only family members can attend the funeral. Mr. Speaker, it's a different environment that we are in. And you would think that members opposite would conduct themselves in a manner that is befitting of the situation that we are faced with. But Mr. Speaker, what have they done? They've come to this honorable house, and I'm happy that the member for ancillary canneries was able to debunk a lot of the false information that was given by members opposite. Because, Mr. Speaker, they criticize the budget because they say it's an election budget. They did not say it's a COVID budget. Here's the rationale that I'm trying to understand where the members are going. Because the budget is higher. Now, when you have a crisis like you have today, who is supposed to bear the bulk of the burden for the country? It is the government. So, Mr. Speaker, obviously, if you're going to meet all the needs that are in the country, you must have the budget to be able to do so. And Mr. Speaker, these are just the estimates of expenditure. And I'm happy they remind me, because I forgot that part. Mr. Speaker, if Labour Party was in office, I could expect a 30% pay cut of public servants across the board, based on their track record. Yes, speculation. But speculation based on facts. When there was no COVID, you proposed 5%. I say things are 6 times worse today than it was under you with COVID. And you can multiply 6 by 5, and that will give you 30% cut. So take it how you want. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, here's what this government proposed. And I want public servants and the general public listening to pay attention. Mr. Speaker, this government, in the midst of the worst financial crisis and health crisis in our lifetime, have not proposed to cut public servant salaries by $1. And I will repeat that, Mr. Speaker. This government, on its track record and in engendering confidence in the people of this country and in our ability to manage the economy and to bring it back to pre-COVID levels, we have not proposed a cut of $1 on the public servant salaries. Here's what we ask, Mr. Speaker. We simply ask for 3 months of reprieve because, Mr. Speaker, cash is what makes the difference. We are not saying we are not going to get the money to pay salaries. There's a delicate balance, and I know the member for Beaufort South knows that. Why did he propose a 5% cut? Because the deficit was rising, uncontrollable. It was declining and you proposed a cut. Wow. Mr. Speaker, I will come to that because the habit of giving misinformation. But I will clarify the information as we go along. So, Mr. Speaker, I want the public servants to understand we are not proposing a cut we are giving an IOU, a deferred payment with 3% interest on it. You can look at. We all agree it is better that there are many St. Lucians at home now who would be happy to get a quarter of their salary as we speak today. And that is not taken away from any of the work that the public servants have done. And that is why a caring government who understands that will not propose a cut for the public servants who continue to have to work in this country. We are not proposing a cut, unlike you, who proposed a cut when there was no crisis and no problem other than your mismanagement of the economy at the time. But you wanted to take it off the public servants across the board. Today, you came to the parliament with it. It's because, as you indicated, somebody who sits on the side of the United Workers' Party today was able to put a spoke in your wheel. It's not because you did not want to do it. It's because you are not allowed to do it. So, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, there are options. There are options available. We as a government, we have chosen the best option, which is delayed payment for 3 months. And you can go and do the maths. We are guaranteeing the public servants after the 3 months that they will get their full pay. You see, Mr. Speaker, the member for Beaufort North will not understand. But Mr. Speaker, I move on, and I want to say to all St. Lucians, this government guards secretly the employment of the people within the public service and their right to their salary. Mr. Speaker, if we have a default, the consequences are more dire than this. It's a lot more difficult. But you see, Mr. Speaker, everybody will tell you 3 months, 3 weeks, you cannot pay salaries. This government has been living hand to mouth for as long as I can remember. And every time the Prime Minister came to the House and said that the country was broke, the members opposite had something else to say. We are the best managers. We didn't just say that. You see, with you, you say things and you cannot back it up. With us, the evidence shows that we are better managers than you have been. Mr. Speaker, as we continue, there are a few people that I need to recognize and congratulate. And one of them is one of the first Seventh-day Adventist churches established in St. Lucia in the community of Choiseul, Dibrel to be precise, which is celebrating 100 years this year. Also, the church that I used to go to, which is Bethany SDA Church, located in Babono, the constituency of the member for Babono, and Zion SDA Church or Labey SDA Church. All of these are celebrating 50 years, not of the establishment of the church there, but of the church buildings in these areas. And I congratulate them because all of these churches continue to make a very meaningful contribution to the development and advancement of the communities and St. Lucia in general. Mr. Speaker, There are some impediments to my regular visits in my constituency, but I will choose to speak to this at a later time. I just want to assure the people of Castries Southeast, I understand what we are going through. I appreciate the sacrifices that they are making in observing the curfews and all of the other logistics and requirements that have been put in place, and that we would continue to work together. For the SLP operators who tell them that I am not running because that is what they are trying to do to get rid of me. They are trying to say to the people, I'm not running. I have news for them. This is part of the fake news being spread by the St. Lucia Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, because the member for Ancillary Canaries did such a good job in dealing with a lot of the issues raised by members opposite, let me just pay a little attention to my constituency. Mr. Speaker, employment. And we've heard the issue of employment. I'll leave the stats for the policy debate, other than to say, you promised jobs. Priority number 1 was jobs. Priority number 2, jobs. Priority number 3, jobs. And all we got was the highest rate of employment among adults and the youth. Unemployment. The highest level of unemployment, almost 25%. And Mr. Speaker, in 3 years, we are now in the 4th year. Mr. Speaker, our unemployment numbers have gone down to 16.8%. Now, if they say we've done nothing, then I will choose to continue to do nothing than to do what they were doing. Mr. Speaker, the problem with the Labour Party, you know, there's a saying, you dot your I's and you cross your T's. The Labour Party does things the opposite way. So you know what they do? They dot T's and they cross I's. And once they cross I's, they can see nothing again, just as they are behaving today. They are not seeing. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members.
Mr. Speaker, the SLP in creating employment on the step used to employ 100 people 3 times a year, so that's 300 people. Pay them $350, 7 days at $50 a day. That used to come to $105,000. Mr. Speaker, since I have been the parliamentary representative and we came back into government, we spend on average $500,000 a year during the STEP program. Some call it beautification. You all are comfortable with STEP, you call it what you want. We create at least 1,000 short-term jobs through that program a year in the constituency of Castries Southeast. 10 days at $50 a day, $500. And if I were to use their formula of 7 days at $50, it would be over 1,400 jobs that would be created. But you know, Mr. Speaker, they don't understand that mathematics. They don't. Mr. Speaker, caregivers. When I came into the constituency, when I came back as a minister, there were over 30 caregivers in my constituency taking care of people. You know how many of them were from Castries Southeast? 2 or 3 of them. Some were from Castries East, some from Castries, all over, except the people of Castries Southeast. The member for Castries East had people all the way from Bishop Gap taking care of people in my constituency. And the people in my constituency remain unemployed. You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know. Today, Mr. Speaker, we have over 40 caregivers in Castries Southeast, and all of them are from the constituency of Castries Southeast. Mr. Speaker, this government used to spend, and they ask, what did you do? What have you done with the money that you claim that you are spending? Well, here it is, Mr. Speaker. The SLP used to spend about $1.5 million in desilting. And every time you had a little rain, Bexar flooded. Since this government came back into office, through the Ministry of Infrastructure, we spent close to $1 million in Castries Southeast to desilt, and we've not had any major flooding in the constituency for that period of time. Mr. Speaker, through this project, over 50 people in the constituency are contracted to carry out these small jobs. Mr. Speaker, I move on. Playing fields. The Bele playing field has been repaired. The Bexar playing field has been repaired. Odsa playing field has been repaired, and lights have been installed on the Odsa playing field. Forestier, we have a new surface. Lights coming. You didn't see all the holes and all the sand we brought and leveled out the playing field? That's what I said. We've done repairs on the Bexar playing field.
Honorable member.
No, I'm his parliamentary representative, so I'm telling him what I've done. Yes, I'm representing him. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
So you do talk about Bizo?
He's voting for me, you know, Mr. Speaker. He's voting for me. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, let's...
Lights are coming this year to Bexar and Bele. Mr. Speaker, the industrialization of Cul-de-sac Valley has seen many businesses developing in that area, bringing jobs, and one of those that are coming is a KFC that is being established right in the Cul-de-sac, Bexar Junction. Mr. Speaker, we have seen the establishment of businesses like Sunbuilt, Essential Hardware, and a number of other businesses where we are seeing a lot more happening in the constituency.
Look at friend Reno putting up one big building.
Big building. Reno is putting a massive business down there, Mr. Speaker. And I look forward to the opening of the business because that means more jobs in the constituency. Mr. Speaker, roads. You know, Mr. Speaker, I took blows for years. Whenever Reno wins, he can get his concessions. He just goes through the normal process and he gets it. With you, he didn't have to go through the normal process, but with
Honorable members.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Forestier Road. After years and years and years of waiting, and Mr. Speaker, I got a lot of blues. I have to thank Minister for infrastructure, for allowing that quality. And now, Mr. Speaker, it's a highway we have in Forest here. Lines and road signs and markings and everything. It's a top-class road, first class. Well done by a local contractor, Skelly's Construction, in the community of Forest here. Yes, he did a lot of business with you in your time.
Honorable Member.
Mr. Speaker, Fromage Road is ongoing. Mr. Speaker, Lacroix to Odsa, that road is supposed to start, and Mac also. And my colleague Minister of Agriculture, we have the agricultural farm roads. We have to do some work in Sandife, Malze, Tetmac, Forestier, and Chope. These are the roads that we have earmarked under this area. Under community centers, Mr. Speaker, we have already issued a contract for the Odsa Community Center. And I will tell them, Mr. Speaker, I will say to the members opposite who criticize us about not tendering, more than 123 tenders have gone out from my ministry from 2016 to today. Almost every project that goes out of my ministry is going out through the competitive tender process that is advertised both locally and regionally. Yes. Mr. Speaker, I know, IDC, I know how you'll tender. About it. We'll talk about that. No, you know your deal with IDC, how you tender. Mr. Speaker, my apologies. Mr. Speaker, I move on. So, Odsa Community Center has already been issued, and Bexar is going out to tender. Mr. Speaker, these are projects within my constituency. On the CDP, I will talk to that in the next phase of the debate. Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries East gave a breakdown of expenses on the St. Jude. Mr. Speaker, I was baffled. For a moment, I was wondering whether he was speaking about the St. Jude project that I am responsible for. Now, Mr. Speaker, some people speak about how many years they've been in the House. And I always say, it's not how long you've been around, it is the content or the substance of what you have that counts, not years. Years is just a number. You see, the member went on, when I do straight line addition, they make jokes at me. When I just say things just by way of passing, not anything serious. They tell you, you see how they check things? I remember one time I said, look here, the decrease was equivalent, the growth rate was 2 point whatever percent and the debt went down. And they said, you see what kind of madness is this? The member for Castries comes to this honorable house and calculate a straight line number. And let me give, leader of the opposition, if you want to say that we've spent 113 million or we will spend 113 million on St. Jude, you need to go back and look at the numbers that you are quoting. 2017, 2018 to 2020, 2021. You gave a breakdown. Was it 139 or 113? 113. 113. Okay, 113. Mr. Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth than what the member said. In his haste to discredit this government, Mr. Speaker, in his haste to discredit the government's management of this important project The leader of the opposition has misguided himself. He has misguided himself and by extension has misled this honorable house, Mr. Speaker. Misguided. And when a man can misguide himself, you can imagine what he can do to other people, Mr. Speaker. So although a veteran, as he calls himself, Mr. Speaker, he based his erroneous conclusion on page 537 of the estimates of 2021 and page 523 of the estimates of 2019-2020. However, Mr. Speaker, in both instances, the expenditure he cited were in respect of 3 projects and not the St. Jude project alone, because he just looked at the project and he didn't look at the details of what is involved in the projects. You know, Mr. Speaker, so here are the 3 projects.
Honorable member, just repeat the page for the 2020-2021.
He quoted page 537 of the estimates and page 523 of the estimates of 1920. Mr. Speaker, the 3 projects, 2019-2020, the 3 projects are as follows. The Japanese Caribbean Climate Change Partnership, the Constituency Development Program, and the St. Jude Reconstruction Project. Mr. Speaker, let's go back.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order,
Yes.
he is misleading the House again. Page 547, as is read, as I can read from this document, says the following. Project code 0078, St. Jude's Hospital Reconstruction Project, actual. It lists the recurrent expenditure, salaries, retirement benefits, etc. And it says project expenditure for the year 2018 to 2019, actual, 17,299,494. There is nothing in that document, nothing on page 547 that speaks to any other project but the St. Jude Hospital project. Anything else, it's not in that page or in that document. Anything else is information that he has that this document does not have.
Mr. Speaker,
You need to clarify so that I understand.
if the member would let me
Watch.
finish my statement, I would guide him and then he could make a point. He could stand on a point of order. But I'm going through, and that's his habit. He speaks before he's third. You know, Mr. Speaker. So here's what happens, Mr. Speaker.
Go back to what you said before and then follow.
On page 523 of the estimates for 2019-2020, he claims the actual expenditure for 2017-2018 of $15 million. And that amount is in respect of CDP.
Mr. Speaker, I was talking about the year 2018. The member said page 537. Is that right, Mr. Speaker? He said 537. I have 537 in front of me here, and 537 speaks to the St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project, and it says total project expenditure capital 17,299,484. That is what I'm speaking to, and that's what I'm reading from this document.
Continue the side I could get, because I understand what you said that he said earlier, but you need to.
Mr. Speaker, I'm making reference to what the member said. And so that's why I am seeking to clarify so that nobody is misguided. Mr. Speaker, I will go over it again. On page 523 of the estimates of expenditure for 2019-2020, the claim is the actual expenditure for 2017 and 2018 of 15 million is in respect of CDP. In fact, the exact figure, Mr. Speaker, is 15,739,364. But this is not payment for St. Jude. So let me give you the breakdown for St. Jude. The amount for St. Jude is only 261,624 and not 15 million. Mr. Speaker, I move on to the estimates for 2020-2021. And as I said before, the figures came out on page 537 as follows. 17 million for actuals of 2018-2019, 37 million on revised estimates 2019-2020, and 44 million for 2020-2021. However, Mr. Speaker, the free amounts which are shown in the line project expenditure are in respect of 3 projects, not for St. Jude alone. They are for 3 projects.
Mr. Speaker, the minister is misleading the House. There is nothing in this document that says that. There is nothing here. There is nothing here in that document on page 547 that says anything about 3 projects. There is nothing on page 547. 547. There's nothing that says that, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members.
Wait.
Honorable members. I'm not sure who has the estimates, but I think I have both estimates now. Well, I don't think I have both estimates before me. And looking at page 523 of the estimates of 2019-2020, and then looking at the estimates of 2020-2021, my question would be, is the print affecting us all? Because to me, Leader of the Opposition, that if you look at the 2 pages, 536 and 537, you cannot look at 537 in isolation without looking at 536.
Because it begins at the bottom
and it goes across
of
to the other side.
536.
There's no indication in the way it is prepared that there is a continuation from 546 onto 547. But I think by looking at the 2 page, because 546, 2019-2020,
it's on one page.
It's just on a single page.
It's on one page, yes.
And I think, but you will still have to explain so that we could move from one page and you will give the totality of whatever that was spent so people fully understand what is going on.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. So Mr. Speaker, because the continuation in the 1920 budget estimate, everything is on one page. 2019-2020, it's on one page, so you can easily follow. On this year's estimates, half is on the previous page, 536, at the bottom of the page, and the second amount or the continuation is on the other page. So if the member will just allow me to give him what the actual expenditure is on St. Jude, and it can be verified from the Accountant General's office, from the Ministry of Finance, from the Ministry of Economic Development.
Only what I can see is what is there.
936 is where it starts.
And that's all I'm saying. So, Mr. Speaker, let me just give the breakdown so he understands. For 2017-2018, $261,264 was spent on St. Jude's, not $15 million. In 2018-2019, $4,595,724 was spent on St. Jude and not the $17 million as indicated. And in 2019-2020, $25,974,800 and not the $44,764,000. So, Mr. Speaker, that gives us a total, an aggregate amount for St. Jude when we would have ended the expenditure for this year of $75,596,148 and not the $113 million as indicated by the member for Castries East. Now, honorable member, I don't know if you are misguided by the figures on the one page. All I'm saying to you is all of these figures I have given there can be verified from the accounts of each of the financial years leading up to today. And I'm on the record as saying this is what transpired. So, Mr. Speaker, the perception that we are spending $113 million on what they call the monstrosity of St. Jude is misleading. And yesterday we saw the same thing with the member for Castries South, and the member for Ancillary dealt with that. So, Mr. Speaker, I move on. Financial management. Financial management and the approach to budgeting is what has landed us where we are today. Mr. Speaker, and a little lesson in history. Prior to 1997, Mr. Speaker, there was an approach towards budgeting by the Sir John-led government, which looked at budgeting in a different manner to what it is being looked at today. So when Sir John planned his budget, this is what he did, Mr. Speaker. He set 10% aside for the sinking fund. And then he took out his key payments, debts, and salaries, and commitments of government. And then he planned his projects on the basis of the remainder of the revenue that was available to government and what was received through grant funding. The issue of deficit budgeting started in 1997 with the member for Viewfort South, where he came with his shopping list, did not look at how much money he had in the budget, and then he put his whole shopping list together, and then he went and started borrowing. So we started spending more than we were earning. And that is when the fiscal gap began to widen. And the records are there. I don't have to go through
Honorable
it.
member, you had some interruptions, plus you had me focus on the estimates, making the adjustment from my point of view. You ending at 1:45.
Yeah, 15 minutes. 10 minutes, Mr. Speaker.
All these interruptions?
Mr. Speaker, I move on quickly to what we are doing. Because, Mr. Speaker,
Are you speaking to me?
this government,
15 minutes.
the Labour Party government, Mr. Speaker, started a vision commission. And I asked the member who was in charge of the vision commission for the report. He told me they never finished the report of the vision commission. But, Mr. Speaker, here's what I will say to you. In response to the change in policy, a National Vision Commission was created by order of cabinet in 2014 to lead a consultative visioning process that would conclude with the creation of a national development plan. Civil society and other citizens of St. Lucia formed an integral part of this process. The Commission convened several consultations throughout the island as part of the effort to fulfill its mandate. In the final analysis, the National Development Plan was not produced as anticipated. Now, Mr. Speaker, good governance comes into play. Mr. Speaker, in less than 4 years in government, this government sat through the Ministry of Economic Development and came up with the medium-term development strategy for this country. Mr. Speaker, and there is a full document that is produced, and we cited 6 key areas that we want to develop. Mr. Speaker, I inherited the Ministry of Economic Development, which used to be managed by the member for Beaufort South and Prime Minister. And when I came in, not only there was no vision, there was no plan. I did not get a medium-term development strategy when I came into government in 2016.
Oh, you didn't want to see it?
No, it wasn't there.
You didn't want to see it?
Mr. Speaker, listen to this. This government sat, and all of a sudden, people want to use COVID as if you don't plan for crisis, you know. You plan for good management, and when crisis comes, you are able to handle it. That is what it is. So, Mr. Speaker, all the talk about buy local and agriculture, we had that plan in place long before COVID. Education, computers, here's what the opposition, and computers are good. We don't take away anything from that. But all they can boast about is a laptop computer with no programming and no content. This government promised world-class education. And this is what we are developing, and this is what we are delivering. And the Minister of Education has already clearly articulated what is happening under the process of education. I don't even want to go to Sir Arthur and how the commission was put together to be able to make Sir Arthur into a university, to offer bachelor's degree. And dates were given by the opposition when degrees would begin. The degrees have not started. But it is going to happen under this government, which is the government with the vision. Security, Mr. Speaker. You see, Mr. Speaker, this is what we have done. We didn't come into government to try and figure out what to do. There is a clear plan. So we identified 3 areas of social and 3 areas of economic. Tourism. So tourism has taken a blow because of COVID. But agriculture is performing, contrary to what you heard the member for Beaufort North say. Education is in the best hands it has been in a long time in the history of this country. And let me tell you, any good plan takes time, Mr. Speaker. You see, they say things and then they go and think about how to do it. We plan things and then we come and say, Mr. Speaker. So that's the contrast. So when we talk about the Ministry of Economic Development, and we've had so much criticism, oh, stop all of these projects. If you stop the projects, what is going to generate economic activity? So here's one of the revenue generators that we identified besides tourism, was infrastructure. And when tourism takes a blow, what you do is you boost infrastructure to take some of the slack from the money that tourism would have generated. So hence the reason, Mr. Speaker, we now have to go back and boost up the whole construction industry. You see, the Labour Party believes in people coming to their constituency offices and begging them for handouts. This government believes in letting people work and earning a livelihood. And we respect the integrity because St. Lucians want to work. And so, Mr. Speaker, when they say, stop all of these projects you are doing, why are you spending all of this money? You see, because if they were in charge, COVID would be here forever. But we have to plan to pass COVID. If we have to live with COVID, our attitude and our behavior will change. But, Mr. Speaker, what will remain is that we will learn to coexist, and so we have to learn to work in the environment whether COVID is present or not, because life does not stop. And so when the Minister of Agriculture had identified 7 crops for us to become self-sufficient in, everybody tell you about food security. Do we have enough? Rice and flour are among the best staple foods that we have. Are we going to go and plant rice to be self-sufficient? Are we going to go and plant flour, wheat to make flour to be self-sufficient? Mr. Speaker, because of our sheer size as a country, there are things we can do and there are things we cannot do. So we have to master what we are good at, and we have the best Minister of Agriculture to lead in this charge. You see, Mr. Speaker, it's not by accident that leaders find themselves in leadership. And I want to tell the member for Viewfort South, the next time he go up to Mulashik, come down with somebody better. The next time you go up to Mulashik, come down with somebody better who can help you to cross the Red Sea. Mr. Speaker,
Parable, man.
parable. You know the parable. You know the parable.
Parable, man.
Who crossed the floor? You spoke about it in your presentation. So I tell you, next time you go up Mulashik, come down with somebody who can help you to cross the Red Sea. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I move on, Mr. Speaker. You see, Mr. Speaker, when we were in opposition, we didn't spend time paying attention to what they were not doing or what they were doing. We put a plan together because we knew this country needed to be rescued. And we have a capable leader, a leader who is visionary. Tell me when last in this country you heard a leader talking about growing this economy to doubling the GDP. When the member for Viewfort South was in office, all he was doing was surviving. And we were surviving in the negative, not in the positive.
So why you have 1.7 last year?
But the 1.7 is our worst year was better than your best year. Our worst year. Our worst year was better than your best year. You know, Mr. Speaker, I sat in the House and I heard the members talking about it's worse in you did worse than 2018. Of course we know, but we were the ones there in 2018. It's not like it's you that grew the economy in 2018. Why you didn't tell me it was than 2016, or it was than 2014, or 2013? Mr. Speaker,
2017 is not yours.
Mr. Speaker, you were government in 2017. Mr. Speaker, I am saying to the people of this country, we have reached the point.
What you promise the civil servant?
We have a set of men in the opposition. Their best years, Mr. Speaker,
Look at you, 1.7.
their best years are behind them.
Best year for tourism at 1.7.
Honorable members.
You see how much of my time they taking? Mr. Speaker, their best years are behind them. There's nothing to look forward to. The member for Viewfort South is a spent force.
Honorable.
Oh, I don't object.
Okay.
Politically, he is a spent force.
I don't object. to
The member for Castries East, who, Mr. Speaker, walked in shoes that he couldn't fit in for many years. And his feet has not grown sufficiently to fit in these shoes anyway. You see?
Honorable member, you should consider now. It's 1:45 now, as I indicated.
Mr. Speaker, all I tell people, Mr. Speaker, if you don't know how to make money for yourself, you can make nobody else make money. Wow. Success breeds success. And if Linguist could not find anything in my wallet, it's not you that will find. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to assure the people of St. Lucia that COVID or no COVID, this government will deliver the St. Jude project. This government, we have given an estimate of expenditure, and it's a tough battle, Mr. Speaker, but it's an estimate. If we need to adjust, we will adjust, but we will manage to the best of our ability. I want to assure public servants, they are in the best hands of governance in this country on this side of the house. I want to assure the people of Castries Southeast that we will continue to work in the interest of developing this country. Because, Mr. Speaker, if there was a time the medium-term strategy made plan, and you made sense, and you know when we launched that? In February, weeks before COVID. We didn't know COVID was coming. And Mr. Speaker,
now that you've mentioned it, is this a document of the House?
By next week, I asked for the copies because it's a magazine. I promise, Mr. Speaker, as soon as they are printed, and I'm in the House, I will make a copy available to every member of this honorable House. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite, just permit me to say this. We didn't just do a rebase. It's not we that just did a rebase. The rebase was presided over by the international agencies. They had to accept it. And two members on the opposition, Denry North and Castries South, they came to my ministry and they sat with them and ran through everything. They had the opportunity to question everything. We didn't just go and rebase to make the numbers look good. The numbers look the way it is for both sides in government. And so, Mr. Speaker, when you have good leaders, you expect good results. And because we have a good leader in the Prime Minister, I know that we will deliver for the people of St. Lucia. I thank you and may God bless St. Lucia.
Honorable Prime Minister.
you so much, sir. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to take maybe a bit of a different approach in my normal stance of deliberately answering directly some of the questions that were raised by members on the opposite side, Mr. Speaker. I attempted to try to see if there was a theme. I didn't find a whole lot of cohesion in the members on the opposite side's debate. And normally where I would have been able to take copious notes, Mr. Speaker, I found myself wanting very much in finding a response. One thing that was certainly, Mr. Speaker, that drew my attention was the idea that the economy has been mismanaged and that we have suddenly found ourselves in a matter of 3 weeks being unable to pay salaries. And so that seemed to be the genesis of most of the opposition's charge. And they developed different themes off of that basic idea. So, Mr. Speaker, I felt it maybe was important, like some members on my side have done, in pointing out things that we have done last year, and in some cases, things that we have done since we've come into government. So, Mr. Speaker, this budget was deliberately named New Challenges, New Opportunities, and let's continue building a new St. Lucia. Very, very clear that we do have new challenges. And those new challenges are not just COVID as a health threat, but certainly, Mr. Speaker, the fallout of COVID as for the economy. And not only the economy here in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, but the economy in the Caribbean and globally. And the sad reality is, Mr. Speaker, none of us actually know what the opening of the world is going to generate. And I think that there was a Nobel laureate economist, Paul Krugman, and I think that he really said it extremely well. He summed it up. And he said it very early. It would appear that the world was put into an induced coma. And why do health practitioners put persons into an induced coma? So if someone comes in with a brain hemorrhage or suffering, and they suspect that there may be multiple organs implicated, and certainly that the person is threatening their own existence, they induce them into a coma and are able to focus on the critical crisis at that time. And Mr. Speaker, just like a human being, until the person comes out of the coma, it's at that point that the doctors will understand whether in fact they were successful in saving the other organs, or whether in fact that there were things that were damaged. And this is very apropos. It's not until the world opens up that we will understand how many airlines, how many hotels, how many businesses around the world, how many banks, how many small businesses that are going to be open. Can we prognose that it is going to be catastrophic? There are some people who say, yes, it is. When we hear numbers that 30 million people, as of yesterday, had applied for unemployment benefits in the United States of America. 30 million. The Canadian government have now gone into the largest deficit in their history. And that countries are printing in excess of 10 and 12% of their GDPs. And that's just to be able to deal with the social fallout, not even tackling yet the economic one. That we're uncharted territories. And we have no idea where this is going to take us. So, Mr. Speaker, let's deal first of all with the mismanagement. Sadly, the information that's available to us in the Social and Economic Review, which gives us a very good time lapse of what has happened over the last 15 years. So we can see the charts right in front of us, and that we can see the trends of the country. And we can also, and we all do it, we will put lines in those charts to find out which administration was in government, to give us a sense as to who managed or who did better during the time. And certainly the members on the opposite side, and I have to say that there was a new era of labor that was ushered in 1997, 17-1, in which they won the election, 16-1, my apologies, where they won the elections, if I'm not mistaken, by 11,000 votes. And then they won the next election, 14-3. The numbers came down significantly. And then they lost the elections in 2006. United Workers' Party came in and with Sir John, and sadly, a very difficult first year for us because Sir John became ill very quickly and died in September. And you know, yesterday was his birthday. I think he would have been 85, 95 if he was so. Clearly, the founder of our party, and also clearly the father of our country. And he came back and to win the election, and the United Workers' Party administration was in government for 5 years. And in the Labour Party administration, many of the members on the same side were there, came back. And after 5 years, our government came in. 4 years. And I was very proud of the fact that we won the election by almost just over 10,000 votes. So we came in with a very strong mandate, with an idea that persons in this country, I think, were dissatisfied with the mediocrity in our country, were dissatisfied with the kind of make-believe politics that was existing in the Labour Party. A party and a government that had excuses. Everything was an excuse. It was either somebody else's fault, or there was something taking place in the world, but there was always a reason, Mr. Speaker, why they couldn't achieve. And there are no two greater examples in their term in office than the OKEU and St. Jude's. There was no reason for them to have not been able to open up both of those facilities. And there is, no matter how they try to defend themselves, there is no excuse for the fact that they were not able to do that. None. So, Mr. Speaker, what do the growth rates show us? And sadly, none of these indicators, Mr. Speaker, by themselves say everything about the economy. But each one tells us a little portion. So we've said repeatedly, Mr. Speaker, the growth rate does not represent wealth to everyone in the country. In fact, per capita GDP doesn't even measure wealth. It's just an average. You can't assume that everybody is equally earning income, but GDP certainly gives you an indication of the wealth of the country. And how it's been divided is the policies of each of the governments, and the emphasis that you want to make sure that it's a government and an economy for all. That's where the difference comes in. So the growth rates have shown us that during the members on the other side's administration, they struggled with that. They struggled. And the time when they came back in government, the world was already recovering from the recession. I'm not going to get into the detail of showing the numbers. But this idea that we only grew by 1.7% this year relative to the other OECS countries, I can equally go back in time and compare their growth rates or their decline in growth rates and compare it to the other OECS times. And it's going to show relative the same thing. It's a mixed match of different things. The OECS economies are extremely different, and we all know that. Dominica is going to have a high growth rate right now because it suffered 2 hurricanes. St. Kitts has really become an exemplary country in many ways, but we all know that the CIP revenues, which they started since 1985, have contributed significantly to that, and how they manage those resources, and they include it as part of their recurrent revenue. And that's going to give a very different example, but that's not to say what they're doing is wrong. It works for them. And I know many people in St. Kitts, Nevis, and St. Kitts and Nevis are benefiting, and you see wealth and you see growth. And certainly when I went around in 2016, 17, with Prime Minister Skerritt, and we got to go to the BVI, and we went to Anguilla, and we went to the other places. I'm proud of the fact that our islands made the decision to become independent. I am. You could see it. You could see the difference. And they're having to depend on the UK government thousands of miles away, and it's been difficult. So the growth rate has surely indicated that we have run this country well. We've had 4 years of consecutive growth. In fact, the aggregate growth rate for the 4 years is 11-point-something%. For the 5 years, the members on the other side, I believe the aggregate growth rate was 2%. 6 times difference. When we talk about debt to GDP, I mean, for the member again of Vieux Fort South, he really, Mr. Speaker, he has to stop that. That every single time that any institution says anything good about this administration, they've all of a sudden become the worst. CDB is worse because of the Pearmandu project, or they lent you money to do the water projects. ECCB, Bank of St. Lucia, and today we're hearing it again, that he's suspicious that the statistics department or the government has influenced the statistics department to rebase. I mean, clearly in the book, in the Social and Economic Review, in the blue box, it even says, if anyone wants any information, you can go online and the CARTAC report is there. Who is CARTAC? It's a think tank that is being funded by the World Bank and the IMF and several international other developed countries to assist this region. Independent. And once CARTAC has done its assessment, it comes through the Ministry of Statistics. Once the Ministry of Statistics works with them in order to approve those numbers, it then goes to whom? ECCB, goes to the World Bank, it goes to CDB, and eventually it has to go through the process and the filtering of the IMF before it's accepted. Because these are the numbers that are going to be used by international entities and banks around the world to evaluate St. Lucia. So to come to the House again and make that kind of allegation, especially a person who was the former Prime Minister and Minister of Finance for so long, is disingenuous. And I would even go as far, I would say, malicious. Malicious. The other number that we can look at, Mr. Speaker, is we can look at unemployment. Again, it's the same country, the same 5 years. We have been able to reduce the unemployment rate from 24.5% to 16.7%. And Mr. Speaker, we don't say that with glee. We say it's a trend. We said that we want to bring it that no one in this country has suffered, and we're not going to stop until we bring that number into single digits. And if not less, we want to be at full employment in this country. That's the difference in the ambition. So, Mr. Speaker, growth rates, debt to GDP, unemployment, the combination of those three numbers have shown, and the evidence is there to speak for itself, that United Workers' Party, and in particular, this last 4 years, we have, in relative to the last 20 years in St. Lucia, we've excelled. We have excelled. And in fact, it's because of what we have achieved over the last 4 years that we find ourselves in a better place to fight COVID and the economic fallout. It's a crisis. And I will explain that point a little bit later. So in terms of what we've been doing for the last 5 years, 4 years, we started off with the ambition that we have to double the GDP. Why? Why would we have to double the GDP or triple the GDP of this country? Why would I say repeatedly when we came in that the country was broke? I've repeatedly said, Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue to run governments in deficits. And fact is that we have a substantial amount of debt on our books. And I'll explain to everyone how that debt got there and what was the asterisks in the history of St. Lucia that really put us in a hole, a bind as to where we are today. So first of all, the question becomes, before I get there, when we came into government, we said that we wanted to be able to have a globally competitive education system, a system that allowed solutions to compete at home and to compete internationally. So what did we do? In recognizing the condition of the physical schools, the Minister of Education and I had many of a discussion. So in essence, the tuition is $9,000. And I want to ask parents whether they believe they were getting $9,000 worth of education. But how could they be when that $9,000 was only paying for salaries? That's all. That didn't happen when we got into office. That's been going on. But the typical way of the opposition, now who were in government then, is to pretend it's not there. Don't bother unless somebody starts complaining. That's when it becomes a crisis. Then all of a sudden you're going to do that. The e-platform. Clearly, the Minister of Education and her team, after long deliberations, understood that e-platform had to be a significant part of our education system. And even when we talk about kids sitting in a CXC exam to want to go, an entrance exam at a primary school, to want to go to a top school. I don't know, but for me, and I know for many of the members in my cabinet, we abhor the idea that there's a best school. Every single school in this country must be a best school. Everyone cannot have kids wanting to come from the south to go to the north because they believe that that's where the best school is. And a mechanism of being able to do that is for us to film our best teachers teaching all of the different curriculums. So it means that all the kids now have a constant in their mind, and that teachers now potentially can become facilitators in the system. And even the idea of what is a school going to look like, in making it now a modern day library which becomes a learning center, integrated with our after-school program, sports and the arts, these are important disciplines in anyone's life. Whether you become a sports athlete, whether you become a singer or an actor, it doesn't matter. The disciplines that you learn in those things will help you through life. Many of us who have played sports have understood that. And we don't have to go abroad, Mr. Speaker. The Aquatic Center is right there as a great model as to how a facility is supposed to work. So when we go to Soufriere, and you have the schools, now you have a track, you have a proper football field with lights, you have a cricket pitch, you have basketball courts, and the goal now is to have sporting clubs, multiple of them, being able to use all of the facilities. And so therefore, if you want to have a track and field tournament, that there are at least 6 sporting clubs in that area, sharing those facilities. So we have to have a much more integrated and diverse education system, all trying to achieve excellence at the same time. So how are we going to make the sports happen? $30 million that we took from our Taiwanese funds to do it. The opportunity for the members on the opposite side to have done the same thing was there. So instead of now trying to help all the constituencies the way that we were doing it on the individual basis, we siphoned out monies over the 5 years, went to the bank, borrowed the money on the basis of the 5-year allocation, and by doing that, and by doing 5 and 6 facilities at the same time, was to get the best engineers, to get the best price. We had 23 companies bidding on the track facilities. 23. If we were doing one track, we would have never had that success. And so this idea that we're going to try to fool the people and say, one individual got paid $30 million. Well then how is the stuff being built? Where's the money coming from to build the Soufriere facility? Or the facility in Deriso, or the facility in Miku, or the facility in Denry, or the incredible academy that we're building in Gros Islet? Agriculture. You know, Mr. Speaker, when I hear the political football that we're trying to use with bananas, the sad reality is at one point in our lives we used to export 120,000 tons of bananas to the UK. 120,000 tons. And we're down now to 8, and then we brought it back up to 12. And the ambition that we have is to bring it to 60. And I want to be very clear to the farmers who are listening tonight. This government has been, has always been, and remains absolutely committed to the banana growers of this country, absolutely committed to the farmers of this country. And we will not be deterred by hurricanes, by droughts, or by changes in the market forces. We will remain by your side and make sure that we can restore the banana sector to where we're going. And we're not saying so, Mr. Speaker, in words alone. I am so impressed with the marketing campaign that now has been designed, which is a logo by the St. Lucia Export Agency for bananas and for guavas and all of our exotic fruits. And the idea is that when tourists come to our country and they go to a hotel, the bananas they'll be consuming will have a logo on them, that we'll have billboards up, that we're going to get the staff to wear pins, and that we're going to have constant competitions to come up with as many banana recipes as we can. And the idea is that person doesn't come to St. Lucia to get a pina colada, although we have some very good pineapple. It's a banana colada, and it's a banana daiquiri, and every morning it's to have banana bread, and to expose the diversity of our banana product. And what encourages me, Mr. Speaker, is despite the dismal marketing job that WinFresh has done, dismal, despite the difficulties that the farmers have here, we're still producing and exporting 12,000 tons to the UK market. So I cannot imagine that if we put together a significantly backed marketing campaign with proper branding. I had the opportunity with the minister to go to London, to meet with Sainsbury, and to meet with Waitrose, and talk about the idea of having a St. Lucia gourmet banana. And I was told they were going to throw us out. They didn't. They said, come back and define to us what that gourmet banana is, because we have standards that we have to adhere to if you're going to make a promise. And we've since developed that idea, and we have now what we call a natural banana, which follows the fair trade standards. But the goal is make sure that persons, when they come to this country, they recognize our bananas, they know that we celebrate our bananas, and I want our farmers to know how important they are. And why is banana an important crop? Because bananas have an unlimited market potential, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in France, or anywhere else in the world. If in fact we're going to have crops, and that's the difficulty with fresh crops have a limited market. It is here in St. Lucia and in the region. That's it. We're not going to compete against the rest of the world when it comes to fresh produce. And that's why tourism plays a certain role, and that's why the Minister of Agriculture and I get on so well. We want to see more products being bought by St. Lucia. And how do you do that? You can increase the duties on products that we don't produce in St. Lucia. Increase the duty on the products we do have in St. Lucia, and reduce the duties on the products we don't, so that nobody's hurt in this regime. The hotels get cheaper inputs to complement paying a higher price for our fresh produce. But the value is being able to say that we have fresh produce. But the only way, Mr. Speaker, to be successful in that is by making sure that we can produce the fresh produce on a year-round basis. So it means the technology has to change. Also what has to change, Mr. Speaker, is that farmers should not be guessing what they have to be able to sell. My good friends Freedom and Mango, all the persons in Soufriere, my constituency, Babino, in Marquis Valley, they have to stop guessing. Can't be that farmers are having to determine by themselves what to produce. We know what the market is, so let us issue contracts with the price, establishing what the quality is going to be, in order to bring those bananas in, Mr. Speaker. Very critical. The abattoir. $22 million that we've spent on an abattoir. that all the calculations are that if we were to run that abattoir, we would go broke. And what has happened to other sectors in St. Lucia where after a while you can't continue to subsidize them. And yes, part of the transition for the DSH project to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into that property is to have been able to move the abattoir, because the abattoir was in conflict with the standard with the horses for quarantine. But DSH have given us the monies that replace the monies that the Taiwanese are putting in. And we're going to build a new abattoir in the valley, and it'll be better and better sized abattoir to fit our particular needs. The Castries the Castries market. On Sunday, certainly want to invite all the members on the opposite side to come, that we're going to be opening up the first phase of the Castries market. So the concept of Buy St. Lucia is only being reinforced by COVID, but it was part of our policy initiatives from the get-go. And Buy St. Lucia is not by just saying it, but Buy St. Lucia is putting the mechanisms in to facilitate the production of local products. And part of that is making sure that when people come to the market, that the vendors are in a safe environment, that the customers believe and see that they're getting better. I liken it to Jean Creole. All those years we put on a jazz and arts festival, and we have a beautiful stage, and we're willing to pay $500,000 US for Mark Anthony. But our own Jean Creole standard, we put them on a substandard stage. This is what we have to change, Mr. Speaker. We must build up our St. Lucian spirit. And the independence event that we did for the 40th anniversary was to start to tap into that spirit. And I think that all of us are happy to see how St. Lucians have responded. And we want to continue to build that level of spirit. Fishermen, we know the fisheries complex now has been privatized. And what we're hoping and what we will be doing is the money that we were putting into the fisheries complex would go into two things. One, into continue to develop the standard of the fishermen in terms of looking at a better way of going out to catch fish and processing the fish. And secondly, that we're going to make sure that we give contracts to the fishermen and the farmers for all of our school feeding programs, all the programs that we're helping our vulnerable persons with, and all of the different government programs that we are going to have a significant program to put contracts in place to be able to help our farmers. The growth of markets. I'm very proud of the work that was done by a St. Lucian architect, Mr. Poyot. I'm a big fan of his, from the Ministry of Physical Planning, for the new market that he designed in Soufriere. And I know that the member from Ancillary Canneries is going to be doing a similar major project in Ancillary. I know the member from Groselet also is going to be leading the way with his village tourism project in Groselet. And also myself in Micoud South at the place called The Gap, where the bus shelter is, to now put a roundabout at that entrance, and putting now a proper farmers market. We want to be able to have established farmers markets all around this island with washing facilities and proper parking, and put proper displays so that now our farmers are proud about how their products are being displayed. The other big one, Mr. Speaker, was health. When we talked about health from the beginning, we said that we must provide people with affordable quality health care in this country. And OKEU stood out like a sore thumb. And when we came in thinking that all ready to move into OKEU, but what we had suspected when we were in opposition came to be true. The fact is the government could not afford to go into OKEU. That their own report showed that the cost of operating OKEU would be $70 million a year compared to Victoria Hospital of 35. This is why you saw the charade of an open ceremony that became a naming ceremony, and then it became a calendar. Everything was to delay, 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 because they knew they couldn't afford to do it. And despite 5 years of government this time, and 10 years previously, you would have thought that they would have had a plan for health care. But it wasn't important, Mr. Speaker, because if it was important, they would have gotten it done. If they cared about the people, Mr. Speaker, they would have gotten it done. The fact is, after 15 years, healthcare was no better than when they first came in. And that's despite the fact that OKE was literally handed to them on a silver platter. It was Mr. Osbert Doverne who was able to go and rescue that project in 2006, 2007. And convince the EU to extend the time because the money was going away. And for the 5 years to get that project implemented, when it came there, it was handed to them on a silver platter, Mr. Speaker. And after the project was delivered, they still couldn't open it. They couldn't even open the dialysis center. And when we called them out on it, Mr. Speaker, what did they do? They said, oh, you can't have a dialysis center if the hospital is not open? And that it wasn't ready? Well, Mr. Speaker, we now know it was ready, and the dialysis center did open before the hospital opened, and so therefore it could have happened, and it did not happen. So, Mr. Speaker, I also knew that they were not ready for OKEU, because part of the master plan for OKEU, Mr. Speaker, was you were supposed to strengthen your primary health care services, because there was not going to be as many beds at OKEU that they had at Victoria. Where was that work? Prior to 2017, where was the work, Mr. Speaker? The public knows there was nothing going on at the primary health care services. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. In fact, when we came in, we were able to get PAHO and also DFID to be able to assist us in making 14 facilities into smart healthcare centers. We're now spending monies with the World Bank because we were able to channel monies from the World Bank to go in now and fix up the remaining primary healthcare services. And that wasn't sufficient. We're now adding a primary healthcare service that's been long overdue in Micoud North. We're in the process of redoing the mini hospital in Soufrière. The land has been identified, the plans have been drawn up, and we're looking to move forward with that. And also this facility in Dennery South. Sadly, the design that was done was inadequate. The work had started, we had to stop the work, and we're now going back, and I believe that that project, Minister of Economic Development, I believe that that job is about to start anytime soon. So we didn't stop there. We're now in the process of building a proper healthcare facility next to the health center on the Chaussee in Castries South. In Castries Central. Because we know that what was supposed to be the healthcare center for everybody in, near Marcia, north of Marcia, the minister's constituency, Entrepot, that persons in the Castries Central area who come off their buses and everything else, it was too far for them to go. So we want to be able to build that facility, and we're going to be doing it through NIC, and the design is being worked on. So we've not just stopped at fixing up the existing facilities, we're expanding it because we've recognized in order for OKEU to work properly, we must have primary health care services. So, Mr. Speaker, I heard members talk about again the contract with Cayman Health City and this ludicrous idea that we are intending to privatize OKEU. The fact is, the persons who privatized OKEU are the members on the other side. They're the ones who privatized it. They created Millennium Heights, and they made it into a statutory body, Mr. Speaker. That's what they did. They took it out of the existing health system. But I have to say to you, Mr. Speaker, it was a good idea, because we know that St. Jude's already operates under that mechanism, and it works better. It cannot be under the Ministry of Health. So what we have done, Mr. Speaker, is to understand, you see, I don't expect members on the other stand to understand the detail about the processes or the standard operating procedures that are in place.
St. Jude's is a much better run hospital. And imagine the standard operating procedures came in 2001, 2002 by Mercy Hospital and have not been updated since. So moving into OKEU, it's not about simply putting a physical facility and taking persons that are accustomed to working through a director of hospital and a PS of health and a minister of health, and now changing it to a statutory body with very different KPIs and a very different process. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the fact that we were able to convince the persons from Cayman Health City, who is an Indian firm who have over 54 hospitals, to provide consultancy work to assist our local practitioners in putting together a world-class operating system that can produce quality healthcare at affordable prices. Because the other part that we're going to do, Mr. Speaker, is introduce a healthcare insurance, and that's where the money is going to come from. So government is going to continue to pay, Mr. Speaker, for the salaries and the capital cost. But we're going to put in a healthcare insurance run by the National Insurance Corporation. And so while there are members in this House who would suggest that it wasn't well thought out and that we didn't understand the need for NIC to be able to broaden, we think that NIC needs to broaden not only to include pensions, but it needs to also include healthcare insurance. And we want to have that conversation as to whether the unemployment insurance should be at NIC or whether it should be at a separate institution. But we're going to have that conversation. But these are three important social elements that help the more vulnerable people in our society to rise up. COVID has taught us and shown us how important it is to have these institutions. And I'm hoping, Mr. Speaker, that what we've done to say the $20 million that we're putting into NIC to be able to facilitate the persons who have not been making a contribution to NIC, but we're saying we want you to sign up to NIC. We want people to get into the habit that when they're making money, that they make a contribution to the state. So the idea of being a taxi driver, or the idea of having a small business and not making a contribution to NIC, or not paying your taxes, okay, is wrong. And that weakens the country. But similarly, the members on this side strongly believe that in order to capture more people into the net, more people wanting to pay, we must lower the corporate tax rate, we must lower the personal income tax rate, and we must continue to lower the VAT rate. We must make it that people are encouraged. And we're going to make more money by getting more people participating in the net than we are by raising the taxes and reducing the base. But we all as solutions must understand the importance to make those very important contributions. We talked about infrastructure. Economy can't grow without infrastructure. Spending $1 million a year on maintaining roads when all the numbers have indicated that we need to be spending in excess of $10 million a year at minimum. We've come in. We're able to secure a loan with the Taiwanese for $50 million US. And when we spend that $50 million, that's only dealing with 1/3 of the roads in St. Lucia. 1/3 of what we're going to be able to tackle. And that's why we are going to be looking to implement even a more aggressive road network program, particularly now with COVID, but that will be the next part of my presentation. We talked about the bridges at cul-de-sac. So I was very happy to hear that the JICA agreement is through, a contractor has been selected, and we're hoping that work is going to start soon. The bridge at Canaries, the soon-to-be new bridge in Anse-Lorraine. Hurricane preparedness. We were spending $1.5 million a year.
Prime Minister, you
We're
have
now
15 minutes in which to complete.
some more time. Yeah, 40 minutes.
I'd like to invoke 3210 to allow the member for Mikud South another 40 minutes to complete his presentation.
Honorable members, the question is that standing order 4210 be invoked to allow the Honorable Prime Minister an additional 40 minutes in which to complete his presentation. I now put a question in. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Thank you very much, members of my party. Hurricane preparedness, $1.5 million a year. We've been spending in excess of $4.5 million just on desilting. That doesn't include the monies that we're spending on debushing and continuing to reinforce and fix the shelters around this country. Road maintenance monthly. On an annual basis, I think the number is close to $3.5 million that we're spending on the sides of the roads, the main roads of this country. Very proud, very happy to report, Mr. Speaker, that we've recently signed an MOU with CCC from Canada in order to look at the North-South Highway, critical highway for the expansion of St. Lucia. The Hunori International Airport. How are you going to grow your tourism sector if in fact your airport is already bursting at the seams? And what we've been able to negotiate, Mr. Speaker, has been the preliminary approval to get a pre-clearance facility in St. Lucia, meaning that when persons are traveling from St. Lucia to go to the United States of America, they will clear U.S. Customs and Immigration here. And if we're going to do that facility, then there has to be a dedicated component of the airport specifically to the U.S. carriers. So we are going to need more space, and this is going to go a long ways in being able to help grow this country. Included in the airport is not just the airport terminal, Mr. Speaker, but also we just got approval from the World Bank for $45 million on very concessionary monies to be able to do the runway and all the electronics at the airport. And we're now looking at designing the taxiway once the flood mitigation study has been completed, that we can put that in place. Ports in Castries, redevelopment. There's no way that we can continue to grow when we have cargo and cruise lines competing with the same docks. And so the idea of moving the cargo port to cul-de-sac is critical. And now redeveloping and making Castries a world-class destination. Security, Mr. Speaker. We got a fantastic presentation from the member from Choiseul and Saltibus, acting on behalf of the Minister of Security. Backlog of criminal cases. We have over 1,000 criminal cases backlogged. It's going to take 2 judges 3 years, Mr. Speaker, in order to be able to deal with that backlog. And it's going to cost us in excess of $13.5 million to be able to do that. But we have to do that if, in fact, we're going to bring justice to this country. It cannot be that persons can commit crimes, stay in remand for years, and possibly even get out, being denied their day in the courts, but certainly swifter action for persons who have committed crimes, we believe is going to be a great form of preventives. New courts. Look at the state of our courts. So the idea of building this new police headquarters, Mr. Speaker, which is well on its way, the design is completed. My understanding it's going to the board of NIC for the final approval, and hopefully we can see that going out to tender very soon. But it's a beautiful design building, both for the police as well as 6 courts in that area. The Court of Appeal, I believe, have found a location. I'm hoping to be able to sign off on that very soon, Mr. Speaker, to get that project started. The forensic lab, the improvements at the forensic lab, the new equipment, the ability to do DNA testing. All of these things have come a long ways. The DPP, a simple thing of having a DPP. And having lawyers in the DPP's office. And having equipment for the DPP to be able to do their job. That wasn't being done. We've now accomplished that. The new marine boats, the radar systems, cameras around the country, the communication systems for the police officers, walkie-talkies, the improvement of the SSU, and I'm not even going to be public about what is going on at SSU, not the unit, but the physical facilities. So, Mr. Speaker, what's the important lesson to learn here? And where is that famous asterisk in the history of St. Lucia that's caused it to be in this kind of debt? And we've made reference to it several times, and persons have attempted to diminish the importance of this. But it was in 2013, Mr. Speaker, when $200 million that were in savings in the government of St. Lucia were drawn down on. And if I could make specific reference to
the 2013, you have it, Minister? The 2013 Social and Economic Review, where it said that the budget was funded by significant you remember the page? It was on page 28 of the Social and Economic Review of 2013, net domestic credit increased by 1.9% to 3.97 million in 2013 as a result of a sizable increase in the central government's net liabilities to the banking. The increase in net credit to the government largely affected the financing of the central government's deficit by drawing down on deposits. Most significantly, central deposits in the banking system, commercial, fell by 54%. It went on to say that there was a significant drawdown on government savings. And so if we go to the, if we go to the Social and Economic Review, Mr. Speaker, and we can go to, I believe it's table if we can go to table 44, Mr. Speaker. On table 44, when we go down to deposits of general government central. Yeah, these were deposits. Yes, savings. So you went from, in 2011, from 294 million, and by 2013, which was the year, 113 million. So let's understand what took place. So the government had deposits. What were those deposits? Those deposits were monies that were kept in accounts in order to be able to pay off your treasury bills and your bonds. Okay? That's exactly what the money was being kept for. That's exactly what the money was being kept for. And what happened, Mr. Speaker, for the whole deficit, what they intended to do was to take, because of the same deficit financing, in their genius, they said it was better to use that money that was in deposits in order to be able to pay down on other debt. Okay? So the difficulty, Mr. Speaker, is that since then, what we have been doing every time that treasury bills and bonds come up, instead of being able to pay them off, Mr. Speaker, we're rolling them over. So the confusion the member from Castries South had last night, Mr. Speaker, was a confusion where he was looking at the total number of borrowings in a year in absence of how much was being paid off. And so once we started to get into the habit of now turning over the debt instead of paying down on your debt and reserving money, so that was to cover up the fact that the government continued to operate in a deficit. So, Mr. Speaker, also if we go to page 74, Mr. Speaker, it says in 2019, the net foreign assets position of the banking sector. In 2019, the net foreign assets position of the banking sector increased further by 14.1% to 950 million. This development was due mainly to the increase of 176 million in St. Lucia's commercial bank's net foreign assets to 267 million. This outturn was primarily reflective of the growth of 9.2% of the total foreign assets of the banks by 371 million in assets held outside of the ECCB territories. So, Mr. Speaker, developments, page 74, the top of the page. Developments during 2019 in St. Lucia's monetary accounts featured a notable increase in the net foreign assets of commercial banks, while St. Lucia's imputed reserves in ECCB decreased by 8% to 682 million at the end of 2019. But the reserves in the banks increased. financial sector developments were characterized by continued growth in the commercial bank deposit lending to a historically high level of liquidity in the banking system in 2019. It is that same liquidity that has allowed the banks to be able to come to the rescue of many solutions in this country. And that is a liquidity situation that did not exist previously. That is a liquidity situation that has continued to grow from 2017. But because you see, man, everybody likes to see different charts. That is what that's saying. While there was further decrease in non-performing, while there was a further decrease in non-performing loans to its lowest level since 2010, increased competition among the banks contributed to lower commercial bank profitability in the review period. So, Mr. Speaker, the evidence is there for everyone to see that the economy has been on a good footing, and it's because of the good management that things have been able to get going. Mr. Speaker, I also want to go to page 69.
And bank credit by sector. Look at this. Page 14. And you see the real, how it could be very, very,
So, Mr. Speaker, as was alluded by the member from Beaufort South, where they talked about that the growth of the debt between the years of 2017 to 2019 versus 2014 to 2016 has come down from 3.6% versus 4.5% in 2014-2015. So what's it saying? The amount of money that we're borrowing on an annual basis has reduced from 4.5% to 3.6%. That doesn't sound like a government that's mismanaging. As I indicated, everything that was supposed to be going up was going up. Everything that was supposed to be going down is going down. The fact is the Labour Party is a party of opposites. That's what they do. So, Mr. Speaker, again, one of the most disheartening statements that was made last night. I couldn't believe it. And again, we heard it repeated again today. That on one side, members on the opposite side say that they empathize with the workers. But on the other side, they have sat here tonight and last night criticizing the members from the Statistics Department and the Ministry of Finance. And certainly whoever the authors are of the Social Economic Review. And they indicated that on page 62, where they have revenue performance, it says, despite a positive performance in the first 10 months, overall revenue collections in 2019 and 2020 was dampened by comparatively low receipts in the last 2 months of the fiscal year, associated with the sharp drop in economic activity due to border closures and scaled down operations induced by the global outbreak of COVID. And the member from Cass 3 South in particular said that that's ridiculous, and that even the authors of this somehow had bought into this idea that we're going to blame everything on COVID. And also, what's interesting in the arguments, certainly by persons that we're in negotiations with, and certainly I can hear it from coming from the members on the opposite side, that they believe that the income drop to the country was only in the last 3 weeks. So I had circulated, Mr. Speaker, already, the arrival numbers for March. The United States market was down 58% in the month of March, Mr. Speaker. The Canadian market was down 57%. The UK market was down 45%. The total market was down 56% in the month of March. And then in the year to date, which would have been January, February, and March inclusive, the numbers were down 20%. We have already started to feel the pain. So, Mr. Speaker, By the time that we started having the discussions with the unions in April 2nd, we already had picked up on the trends. We had a fairly good idea where this was going. And it was because of that we were able to have the kind of presentation with them. And why? Who in this cabinet, who in this parliament would at a time like this ever want to put workers in a marginalized position? Who? Certainly not the members on this side. We've been in government for 4 years. I've never heard anyone talk about laying anybody off. In fact, I'm proud of the fact that this government is one of the first governments, if not the first government, to have actually negotiated a collective agreement in advance. We have a collective agreement until 2023. What's the significance of that? Is that members can go to the bank and borrow money on their future earnings because it's been contracted. That is what this government is about. Instead of paying persons years after the fact. So it means that they would have had to suffer the entire time of the negotiation, not having the benefit of knowing what their contract was going to be. But as we heard from the member from Cass 3 Southeast, it didn't matter anyway because it typically was under labor 0, 0, 0 anyway. Whether they got it in advance or whether they got it in the back, it was the same. But under the United Workers' Party, they've always gotten an increase and we've always treated the workers fairly. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Caribbean Development Bank. I want to thank the ECCB, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. I want to thank the World Bank. I want to thank the EU. I want to thank Taiwan. I want to thank the local and regional banks. And I want to also thank the IMF. We have worked over the last 6 weeks to be able to find monies that we can borrow to be able to handle this budget crisis. And members on the other side brought up some very interesting points, and I want to deal with those things. So there was a budget gap, or had to be funded, of $560 million. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that gap, as a member from Vieux-Fort South would know, does not include the rollovers of your bonds and treasury bills. So any of those bonds and treasury bills that don't roll over, then the government is obligated to buy those, to pay them off. We have been assuming, Mr. Speaker, that 75% of the bonds and treasury bills are going to roll over. So of $700 million, the government possibly is going to have to find an additional $175 million on top of the $560 million that's in the budget. Both the member from Vieux-Fort South as well as the member from Labrie, I think, appropriately said that $950 million of recurrent revenue or tax revenue is ambitious. I was very happy that the member from Vieux-Fort South actually worked out the averages. But we've done the same thing. We assumed that there would be 0 tourism arrivals for the first quarter. We've said that we're talking about a 50% reduction in arrivals, and have attempted to work out the shortage in income shortfalls as it pertains to that. I am encouraged, on one hand, that members on the other side have recognized the ambition of $950 million. But they didn't go the step further, Mr. Speaker. The step further is that if you're earning tax revenue of $950 million and your wages and your debt payments together come to $850 million. This is the difficulty. And if in fact we had projected lesser revenue, what you're really saying is the country is ready for a structural adjustment program. Because it would be impossible. So from the beginning of my budget presentation, I said that if there's ever a year that the name of the process we're going through, which is the estimates, is true, this is it. And I have said $950 million needs to be the target for all of us. Because if we don't reach that $950 million target, there are some more difficult decisions that we have to make. And my government has chosen to fight. The budget does not propose any wages cut. The budget does not call for anybody to lose their job. No. But the budget calls for all of us to dig deep and to understand what we're confronting. And the crisis of this budget is the first 3 months. That's the crisis. Because we've seen this dramatic drop in revenue. And if you are to pay your normal bills every month, you would now leave yourself, the country, exposed on defaulting. And if we have either a technical default through our bonds or treasury bills, or a default with one of our loans, the ramifications are going to be severe. And we don't have to go too far, Mr. Speaker, to find out. We can go to Barbados, we can go to Grenada, we can go to Jamaica. We all have friends that can tell us what a structural adjustment program looks like. So rather than accepting the fact that that's what it was going to be, I'm proud of the team at the Ministry of Finance who've been able to go out and negotiate $500 million in loans. So instead of having to go into this budget process speculating as to whether we can get $260 million in bonds and treasury bills, as so rightfully pointed out by the member of Vieux Fort South, I think that would be a tall order. So to take away the anxiety in the budget, we've been able to get $500 million. And that $500 million, Mr. Speaker, is on the basis of the confidence that these institutions have had in St. Lucia and the relationship that we have developed with them over time. But does it mean, Mr. Speaker, that we're out of the woods? That we can say to the unions, hey, we've been able to negotiate $500 million, we still have $60 more million to find. And we have to be cautious because we know that if those bonds and treasury bills do not roll over completely, and if they roll over at 75%, that's an additional $175 million we're going to have to find. And so we're saying, it is a difficult task that we have for the rest of the year. A critical year. And I don't want solutions to be fooled for one moment, Mr. Speaker. That despite what we've been able to negotiate with the IFIs, there is a limit to everybody's pocketbooks at this time. Everyone is in crisis. And to think that there is going to be some knight in shining armor that's going to love St. Lucia and all of a sudden wave some magic wand and give us endless amount of grant monies. I'm certainly not going to sit here waiting for him to arrive. Because there are too many people in this country that are depending on the success of this government to bring them through this economic crisis that we're facing. I think that our government has shown a tremendous amount of capacity in dealing with the health crisis. And we said from day one, it is two battles. First, the battle of health. We must deal with that battle first. Because if we don't deal with that battle first, then we will not be able to focus our attention on the economic side. And what is it that we've said that's been so long, Mr. Speaker? The first thing that we said was that we're going to come out with a social stabilization program to deal with those persons who have been misplaced. But we all know how much limitations we have. And that's why the genius of what the NIC did to help those persons who've been making a contribution and did not burden the country's debt or revenues. And we were able to quickly work with Taiwan to convert the loan of $20 million that was supposed to go into the feeder roads to come in for budgetary support. But what we know is that with the Taiwanese monies, we have tremendous amount more of flexibility. With the IMF monies, you don't. The IMF has some very strict rules on what you can borrow the money for and what you can pay. And paying debt is not one of them. But what's great about this government and about members on this side, and when we talk about transparency, Mr. Speaker, and trust, that every single year that we've been in government, we have published the Article 4 statements. Every year. No. When the members on the opposite side were in government, 2013 and 2014, they did not publish the statements because it was their choice. It was not. No, it was not. 2013 and 2014. No problem, we'll prove you wrong.
Only once.
2013, 2014. Okay, Mr. Speaker? Even if it was once, where's the transparency and the honesty? Because you can deny putting it up. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, you see again, Mr. Speaker, whenever members on the other side don't like what somebody says, it's always their fault. They never accept the responsibility on their side. That's what goes on all the time, Mr. Speaker. And the moment they do, they criticize it. So all I can say, Mr. Speaker, is that we had to sign a letter of intent with IMF, and it will be made public. And exactly to what we've agreed to do is in that letter of intent. And we have no difficulties with it. But I want to say on record that I appreciate what the IMF has done for us. I appreciate how quickly they have moved, particularly Kristalina, the managing director. Yes, correct. Grenada and Dominica. But I am grateful that St. Lucia was there. I'm grateful that St. Lucia was there. I'm grateful to the CDB. I'm grateful to the governor and the board members of the ECCU. I'm grateful to the government of Taiwan because these are the friends we have in these most difficult times that have come to St. Lucia's rescue and will allow us to be able to survive till tomorrow. But I want to say to all St. Lucians that tomorrow is challenging and that tomorrow is going to require a level of unity that we've never seen before. And what we need, Mr. Speaker, are less people who are attempting to scare people. There's enough information out there to scare everyone. How can you not have the compassion and say you're not scared? How can you stay on the other side on one hand and say that you care about the workers, see the numbers here, and not recognize that the medium-term and long-term threat to the workers if we don't make it through? Those are incompatible. Or as my good friend from Dennery South said, it's hypocrisy. So Mr. Speaker, what's the plan? What's the plan, Mr. Speaker? So Mr. Speaker, in recognizing the deficit gap and recognizing that we were going to have to raise $560 million of revenue, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance and its team have moved swiftly to negotiate $500 million in debt. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, recognizing that we do not control when the international borders are going to open, and understanding, Mr. Speaker, how much money tourism generates both directly and indirectly through jobs and through taxation. Recognizing those things, Mr. Speaker, how do we replace that revenue? How do we make sure that we give ourselves an opportunity to get to the 950 million? And so that's why, Mr. Speaker, keeping the capital projects in play is critical. The capital projects, Mr. Speaker, have zero implications to your local revenue. We don't have to find money every month to pay for those projects. These are projects that are already funded. These are new monies coming into St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. And you know what the difference is, Mr. Speaker? The members on this side would rather go out, spend the money, borrow the money, get these projects going, create jobs for individuals that they can earn. Instead, I believe the members on the other side would keep the social stabilization program running forever. So you have a choice. We can continue to raise money to provide subsistence allowances to persons who are unemployed, Mr. Speaker. And even 3 months is a challenge. And I would say to you that it would be catastrophic if we had to go 6 months under that formula. Versus borrowing money from the outside that was already negotiated, shovel-ready projects, move to expedite those projects faster to create jobs for people. And you achieve two things. You achieve two things because the spirit of solutions are to do for themselves. That's what the spirit is. The spirit is not to stay locked up in a house, but to get out and work and to know that I earn my money every month and to come back home and to bring money to my household knowing that I did that. That is the spirit that I know in St. Lucia. Not one of mendicants, not one of people who want to sit by and to say, la gouvernement, Mr. Minister. See, some people like that. Members on this side don't like that. We want to empower the people of this country. And Mr. Speaker, we are going to push to get works done on the schools. We are going to help and work with CDB and the World Bank to repurpose.
Honorable members.
Mr. Speaker, we are going to work with the CDB and we're going to work with the World Bank to repurpose the loans so that we can get many more projects on the ground.
Honorable members, allow the Prime Minister to complete his... That is okay.
Mr. Speaker, we are going to work with the CDB and the World Bank to repurpose loans to help with preparing for the hurricane season. Shelters, desilting, infrastructure of drains and roads. We're going to continue to work on improving our schools. We're going to continue our roads on the West Coast, the OECC, and we're going to negotiating currently with several contractors to do some direct design bill finance to get as many projects we can get off the ground. We're going to be working with the call centers, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing promise in that sector, that many of them now are seeing much more work available, and we're going to work with them to expand their facilities and give them facilities in which order they can practice the necessary social distancing. The water projects in View Fort, Castries Market, the Derek Walcott Square, the Constitution Park, Banans redevelopment. We're going to get going HIA. Mr. Speaker, the St. Jude's Hospital will continue in earnest. We're going to work with NIC to make sure we get that police headquarters started. The private sector, we're working on new incentives on the private sector to get them and encourage them to help rebuild St. Lucia. We're going to work with the hotel developers. We have the Dye Mall that's going to be coming on. Mr. Speaker, we're going to be working with agriculture, the linkages of our 7 fresh fruits. More than ever, we need to get that project completed. Bananas, Windfresh. We have to help our bananas, but we have to restructure Windfresh, and that is on the way. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a government that has a very clear plan. Do we have all the answers? No, Mr. Speaker. And that is why we've put together an Economic Recovery Council made up of the private sector, made up of the unions, and also to be made up of the opposition. And we will work together to fill in the pieces that we have not thought of. And anything that we can do, but I have to say, Mr. Speaker, there must be a collective effort in this country to achieve the $950 million or more. There must be a collective effort, and this is why we're asking the unions, not to punish them. We're not asking them to do something that's so egregious. Nobody's asking anybody to take a pay cut. We're simply asking for 3 months, if necessary, if in fact the revenues that we earn are below $70 million, to assist the government to preserve $14 million in cash a month, to act as a reserve in case a bond or a treasury bill or an emergency happens, that we have some cash on the side. We have cut all expenses within the government budget. The projects I've spoken about are projects that are funded already. And this is to help the unions. Because if we can get those projects off the ground, and we can put money into those people's pockets, and we can get the economy recovering, then the revenue means we'll make the $70 million quicker. The unions have helped. They have worked hard during this process, all of them. And that's why we could not ring fence anyone. To select one group over another group would have been impossible. We're not speaking to them as nurses. We're not speaking to them as police officers. We are speaking to persons who are employed by the government, who are citizens of St. Lucia, that all of us must have our hands in to be able to make this work. So this is what we want to be able to do. Mr. Speaker, I just want to... Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, there are several people who have displayed the incredible amount of generosity. And I don't want them to go unnoticed, Mr. Speaker. Barbara Gustin, she's an asthmatic person, risked her health, asthmatic, left her house to cook and deliver meals to vulnerable persons in the constituency. Veronica Matra, who helped Juliet Emanuel in getting an ambulance and brought her to St. Jude's because her family weren't able to do it, and then did all the necessary requirements and brought her back home. This is the kind of spirit that we're looking for in this country. Mr. Speaker, Alicia Johnson, Rosary, and Mercedes Saltibus were very much concerned of the plight of 5 elderly people who had no family ties. And they distributed food and clothing and toiletries to help them with their needs every day. I know that the spirit that exists in Micoud South exists everywhere in St. Lucia. Everywhere in St. Lucia. And I am sure that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of stories very similar to this. The persons who continue to come out and volunteer their time. Peterson Auguste, right, who had his car from Blashaw. In Celestine and her brother from Angers helping deliver all the food to the needy. Dyke Flavius for calling to donate his van for the use when times were called upon. Alan Smith in lending us his van and getting us supplies when we needed them. This is the community spirit that needs to go around this country. That's how we're going to make it through this. These are going to be difficult times, St. Lucia. And I'm appealing to the union workers. If the government makes the revenue, we don't want to touch your money. But for the sake of St. Lucia and for the sake of all of us, let us not put ourselves in the jeopardy of having to go into a structural adjustment program. Yes, the member from Vieux-Fort South said it. He said it. These are ambitious numbers. But if we put any numbers that were less than this, Mr. Speaker, it would automatically say structural adjustment. But I want to give the assurances to those persons who have bonds and treasury bills, those persons who have lent money to St. Lucia. Like in the past, we will fight to the end in order to ensure that your credit is good with us. And I think it's important for the unions to appreciate that it strengthens our hands in our negotiations when everybody out in the world sees us working together. I'm not asking them to do anything more than the person who's lost his job, who doesn't have anybody he can appeal to, Mr. Speaker. And that's why the work that the Minister of Tourism is doing to find the protocols to reopen our doors as quickly as it possible. And yes, there's going to be risk. And the member from Vieux-Fort South indicated that. But we also have risk because we know that we cannot afford to do this. The $500 million is a one-time intervention. It is for this year. We must make this budget work, Mr. Speaker. We have to come through this together. And I assure you that the members of the Ministry of Finance, the members of the Ministry of Economic Development, the members on this side will show no rest, and we will continue to endeavor to work hard in order to take care of the people of this country. And we want persons to. There is, remember, Mr. The honorable member from Castries East. Yeah? You know, something I've never said, Mr. Speaker. We're all here to get money. I'm so happy that the member from Vieux Fort South was eventually to stop practicing his social distancing and come and join us. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing more important than what we're attempting to achieve here today. And anything we can do to be able to make persons aware of the crisis that this country is in and the effort that it's going to take. And the members on this side are up to it. I'm hoping that the members on the other side are going to be up to it. I certainly know that their private sector, the manufacturers, the farmers, everybody is willing to fight. We need to do this together. So, Mr. Speaker, on that note, I want to say my last piece here is we said that this is the estimate. We don't know. So the intention, exactly what the member from Vieux Fort South had suggested, is that we would come back here later in June to debate the appropriations bill. And hopefully when we come back to debate the appropriations bill, that we would have a much better idea as to where we are. And certainly I would say to you by the end of June, we'll have a much clearer idea of where we're going to need. If we need to come back and do another budget, we will. But whatever it's going to take to succeed, we shall. And I'm asking all solutions, I'm also asking all of the union workers. I know that this is a difficult task. We are not asking or taking away any of your money. In the budget, we have put everyone's salary for the year. There is no cuts. We have not proposed anybody to be laid off. But we're saying that if we're going to do that, then we need to work collectively together. We've come to you not to force you to take any deal, only to advise you of what we are facing. And it is much better if you come to the table and join hands with us to save St. Lucia. And thank you very much.
Honorable members, the question is that the Honorable House of Assembly do adopt the report of the Standing Finance Committee on the estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2020-2021 in the sum of $1,697,312,800, and do agree that the said sum do form a charge against the consolidated fund and other funds of the state of St. Lucia. I now put a question. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many are of a contrary opinion, say no. No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, before I call on the Prime Minister to move for adjournment of the House, let me just take the opportunity to thank you. I know we include the COVID period and for accepting the protocols that we put for the opening of the House and for the debate that we had over the last 2 days. Let me thank the GIS staff, the staff from the Ministry of Finance that provided information, Sergeant at Arms and his police officers, the staff of the Parliament itself, the staff from the AG's office that came here to assist us over the last 2 sittings. Let me again, I guess, most of us, all of you who spoke, did thank the frontline workers. Again, let me say thank you to them on behalf of the Parliament itself. Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And before I ask for the House to be closed, it would be remiss of me if I also didn't say, on behalf of all of us parliamentarians, how grateful we are to you and to your staff for the last couple of days. And also let me reiterate our support and our gratitude to the persons from GIS and also the police officers and certainly the staff downstairs that continue to nourish us during the last 2 days, and to thank them very much for their patience. Appreciate it. On that note, Mr. Speaker, I ask that the House be adjourned sine die.
Mr. Prime Minister, as you mentioned the staff downstairs, I've just been given a note. Please inform members that there is supper, so don't leave. Honorable members, the question is that the House do stand adjourned sine die. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as of contrary opinions, you know. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House stands adjourned.
Well, there you have it, the end of this evening's session after 2 days of debate on the estimates of expenditure, of revenue and expenditure for the financial year 2020-2021 in the sum of $1,697,312,800 as a charge against the consolidated fund and other funds of the state of the nation. Presentation started from this afternoon session. The MP for Vieux South, Dr. Kelly Anthony, the MP for Castries North, Honorable Stevenson King, MP for Labrie, Honorable Alva Baptist, and briefly the MP for Castries South, Castries Central, Honorable Sarah from Bobre, and MP for Castries South, Honorable Guy Joseph, and the rebuttal by the Prime Minister, Minister for Finance, and MP for Vieux South, Honorable Alan Shasney. The MP for Castries Central, the Honorable Sir Alfred Bobre, on a point of order, expressed her gratitude and acknowledgement for the support of the French government to help manage the COVID-19 crisis. The MP for Castries South East, the Honorable Guy Joseph, complimented the GIS and the NTN and the Command Center for a comprehensive live coverage of COVID-19 related programs and issues, and indicated that St. Lucia stands among the top countries able to combat COVID-19. In the PM's rebuttal, he made reference to a number of social, infrastructure, and economic development programs. He made mention of the completion of St. Jude Hospital, the human redevelopment program, the redevelopment of the city of Castries, the Castries Highway. He emphasized the importance of maintaining the capital projects and also indicated that the Parliament will be back in June to debate the appropriation bill. Before we end, let us briefly summarize some of the on his budget presentation regarding the fiscal deficit and resource gap. The Prime Minister made mention of the support the expenditures that have been highlighted in his presentation, that government intends to raise a total of $1.030 billion in domestic revenues. Of this amount, approximately 10.8 million has been earmarked to fund project capital expenditure under the Department of Housing. Domestic revenues will be complemented by grants totaling $106.98 million from the following donors: the Republic of China on Taiwan, $38.65 million, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, $20 million, the Caribbean Development Bank, $10.14 million, UNEP, $2.4 million, the UK CIF, $13.4 million, the European Development Fund, $5.9 million, others $16.4 million. The Prime Minister said based on the forecast revenues and grants, a financing gap of $559.99 million is projected. Of the amount required, 53.2% is expected to be financed from external loan disbursements from the following sources: the Caribbean Development Bank, $52.38 million, World Bank, $43.2 million, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, 72.39 million, and the Republic of China and Taiwan Bank $129.88 million. Domestic financing requirement amounts to $262.12 million, of which 78.6% is expected to be sourced by various means, including treasury bills, notes, and bonds. The Prime Minister said on financing plans, the government financing plan indicates that a sum of $262.12 million to be sourced domestically. But he said his government has aggressively engaged the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, ECCB, and secured debentures in the sum of $54 million, and discussions are also at an advanced stage with the Caribbean Development Bank for a policy-based loan in the sum of US $30 million. Moreover, he said discussions are ongoing with the aforementioned institutions to provide additional financing to the tune of 65 million EC dollars, leaving a balance of 62 million to be financed through treasury bills and bonds. The Prime Minister also thanked the management and staff of the Department of Finance who have worked tirelessly over the past weeks and months, conducted a number of stakeholder consultations with local and regional international stakeholders. He said they have engaged a number of international financial institutions, such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, ECCB, and other development partners, with a view to secure financing and relief measures to help combat the COVID-19 crisis. So this is where we end our broadcast for this evening. We invite you to join the GIS for subsequent broadcasts of the programs and the estimates of expenditure and in fact the debate, the estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2020-21 in subsequent broadcasts on NTN. And here's reminding you that the appropriation bill, the members will meet here again in June to debate the appropriation bill. And this is where we come to the end of our broadcast for tonight. We thank you so much for viewing, and we invite you to join us in subsequent broadcasts for more on this year's budget debate. I'm Prime Minister Hutchinson, thanking you for viewing.